This is a CBS News special report. I'm Gail King with John Dickerson, Bianca Golodriga, and Margaret Brennan here in New York. President Trump is arriving right now at the presidential palace in Helsinki, Finland, for his first summit with President Putin. Putin and his entourage walked into the palace just a few minutes ago.
President Trump has told CBS News he has low expectations for his summit with the Russian leader. Mr. Trump has been urged to confront Putin on several topics, including Friday's U.S. indictment of 12 Russian military intelligence officers accused of hacking the computers of the Democratic Party officials during the last presidential election.
While the president is trying to diminish the significance of the meeting, it is drawing huge interest from around the world. Nora O'Donnell is leading our coverage in Helsinki. Nora, good morning.
And good morning to you. A bit of drama this morning as this summit is already an hour behind schedule. In fact, it was President Vladimir Putin of Russia who has kept President Trump waiting. He was scheduled to arrive just about an hour ago, but as President Putin likes to do, he likes to keep other world leaders waiting. And so now you see President Trump arriving here just about an hour late. And this is a historic meeting. Of course, Trump is the fourth U.S. president to meet with Putin, but never before in history has a U.S. president spent time alone with the Russian president. In fact, according to the White House schedule, they have budgeted an hour and a half for Trump and Putin to meet alone, just the two of them, with some translators. And so the question that many have this morning is, what is on the agenda? What are they going to discuss? Will President Trump deliver a strong rebuke to the Russian leader to cut it out, not only for what the Russians did in the past presidential election, but what, according to the Director of National Intelligence, the Russians are doing right now? Major Garrett is here in Helsinki. Major, what have you learned so far?
Well, Nora, as you said, this is a high visibility, high coverage diplomatic event. And two questions at the front end are significant: what to call it and what to make of it. First, what to call it. For days before we got to Helsinki, senior administration officials lobbied White House reporters, at times badgered White House reporters, don't call this a summit. Just call it a meeting. On the Sunday shows, that was repeated. And yet yesterday, with one single tweet, President Trump himself declared it's a summit, which brings us to question two: what to make of it? What is on the agenda? What American interests will President Trump advance here in Helsinki? The president, for whatever reason, has been incredibly vague about his agenda with Vladimir Putin. And it's been unclear how significantly he will press that issue of election meddling in 2016 and what, as you said, Nora, Dan Coats, the Director of National Intelligence, says is still going on in preparation for the midterm elections in 2018. There are lots of other issues: Crimea, the Baltic states, Syria, and the like. What is the president's agenda? That much we don't know. He has said he wants to take stock of Vladimir Putin face to face. Well, in that hour and a half, they'll have plenty of time to do that. Having been in Brussels at the NATO meetings, I can tell you, Nora, some diplomats there were concerned about what might come from that hour and a half one-on-one meeting, where Putin might drive a harder bargain than President Trump is capable of deflecting. No one knows what's going to come of it, but there is some anxiety in Europe that President Putin, in that one-on-one encounter, may get the best of the American president. Nora, back to you.
All right, Major Garrett, we are expecting to hear some brief remarks from President Trump and President Putin as they meet here in the Finnish presidential palace, this opulent Gothic hall, before they go into this one-on-one meeting. Already, President Trump has spoken this morning blaming U.S. foolishness, in his words, saying that U.S.-Russia relations have never been worse. Well, Elizabeth Palmer has reported from Moscow for years. And how is the Russian media interpreting those comments from President Trump this morning?
They're loving it. They are trying to line up with President Trump against many of the U.S. institutions. And this really bolsters the case that they're trying to make, that if it weren't for example, the Justice Department indictments and various what the Russians would call deep state interference, President Trump would be here offering normal relations with Russia. So it's really played into Putin's hands even before this summit gets going.
What's the best case scenario for President Putin as he comes into the summit?
Oh, I think he's already won. You know, he's coming off this triumphant World Cup soccer tournament, the largest sporting event in the world. He hosted it. It was flawless. He's on a roll. And now he's being shown on TV all over the world, sitting down with the U.S. president, signaling that he's the man to bring Russia in from the cold. So he doesn't have to walk out of this with anything. He's already got a great victory.
It is incredible to think, in addition to this unprecedented private meeting between the two presidents, there will also be a press conference. There has not been a joint U.S.-Russian press conference with Putin in more than a decade because President Obama refused to do that. Does that give Putin some sort of standing that he's not had in the past decade?
Absolutely. It adds to his stature. And, you know, he's very good at press conferences. He loves to talk. We saw him last night before the soccer game. So relaxed. He's going to be enjoying that moment. And if history teaches anything, he's going to bring it off with brio.
Well, we have an historic morning to cover here. Elizabeth Palmer, thank you so much. For now, let's send it back to New York. John?
Nora, thank you. Face the Nation moderator and CBS News senior foreign correspondent Margaret Brennan is with us. So, Margaret, what are you looking for in this meeting today?
Well, I think what we're watching here is the end of yet another Obama legacy. Isolating Vladimir Putin is no longer. He comes, as Liz just said to you, in the wake of this huge World Cup, step onto the global stage, and now he's being welcomed with open arms in many ways by the President of the United States. It's not only the kind of attention that he has craved, but it's the exact opposite message that he's been delivered by world leaders, which has been, if you misbehave. And by misbehave here, we mean, look, this coincides with the anniversary of the shoot down of that airliner, that passenger airliner over Ukraine just a few years ago. That killed 300 people. Russia was blamed for that. Poisoning on UK soil just in the past few months, British citizens. You have the election meddling. You have the military intervention into Syria, into Ukraine. That is why Russia was isolated by President Obama and by world leaders up to this point. And so what President Trump is saying here, which is consistent with his sort of worldview, is history starts now. It starts with me. This is the reset here, and that all that doesn't matter. And that's what's so troubling to President Trump's national security staff, because they say, no, we need these precedents. We need to be able to put more pressure on Vladimir Putin to get somewhere.
Yeah, Obama famously called Russia a regional power, and that seemed to really irk Vladimir Putin. He wanted to be seen as a global power. Given the indictments that went down on Friday and what we heard from Rod Rosenstein, Vladimir Putin lied to President Trump, lied to his face when President Trump said he asked him about election meddling, and he said, Vladimir Putin told me no, he didn't. This directly links the meddling with the Russian government.
Right.
How important is it for President Trump to say, you lied to me? Why?
Well, for many, particularly in the national security establishment, it is important to say, we know what you did. And in many ways, that indictment is not so much about a prosecution, but it's about deterrence. Look at the detail in that 29 pages to say, we know exactly how you did this, so don't do it again. And by don't do it again, actually, if you listen to the Director of National Intelligence, they're doing it right now, because he's saying there's meddling happening going into the November races.
And how hard do we expect him to press President Putin on this? He's been reluctant to press President Putin about anything leading up to this meeting today.
Well, and that's exactly it. That's why I say, history starts with him. For him, this is in the past. And that's what's so interesting to hear from the Homeland Security Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, from Dan Coates, the Director of National Intelligence, from others time and time again. No, this is happening right now. Flashing red lights in terms of messing with our digital infrastructure. They're trying to emphasize that to the president.
We should note we're waiting to hear from President Putin and President Trump. So while we wait for that, Margaret, on this question, President Trump said that the Russians would never have gone into Crimea if I were president. But they are, according, as you say, to the Director of National Intelligence, they are, who has used the word attack, they are in an ongoing operation. So this isn't about the past, it's about the present. And one interesting split I thought was that you had Ambassador John Huntsman say this question of interference is going to be a topic. He's going to hold him to account in this meeting. Right. John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, essentially said the same thing. Well, now with nobody else in the meeting, we're relying on the president's word after the meeting's over to give us an account of how what his advisors are saying is the #1 agenda item, how that went.
Exactly. And this press conference of them standing side by side, that hasn't happened since, I think, 2005, when Bush 43 had a press conference with Vladimir Putin. And then, as many U.S. diplomats said, we learned better. We learned not to do that again, because what is Vladimir Putin going to say standing next to the President of the United States in terms of, no, we didn't do it? Is Donald Trump going to choose, as President of the United States, to say, yes, you did, and it matters when you attack America, even if I wasn't in the Oval Office at the time? An attack on America at any time is not acceptable.
So, Margaret, the president's argument is, look, I'm downplaying this question of interference because there's things we need to work with Russia on.
Right.
So that sets the expectations high for this, which is to say this thing this interference that people are worried about, let's not focus on that. Let's focus on what we can do together. So what can the U.S. and Russia do together? What would big achievements be from this meeting?
And in some ways, Vladimir Putin's strategy here has been successful, because he said, you need me. Even if I misbehave, I'm going to show you how much you need me on some of these international agreements. In terms of deliverables, people were hoping for, the most low-hanging fruit is trying to extend the existing so-called New START treaty, which, puts some caps on ballistic missiles and the like. However, Russia's already cheating on the INF treaty, which is another, nuclear arms control agreement. President Trump could extend that. There's already a provision in New START that would allow him to do it and put the Trump brand on it. Will he accept it? I don't know. He wouldn't do that with the nuclear deal with Iran, just put his own brand on it and extend it. Will he do that here? That's the hope. The other things are some sort of window dressing, some humanitarian access they're asking for. NSC officials said yesterday to me that they were asking to be able to bring aid convoys into Syria, to the southern part of that country, which, by the way, is under assault right now in violation of an agreement that Vladimir Putin and President Trump made twice, in Vietnam and in Germany in 2017. So that's what's interesting, this idea of approaching, we can have another agreement with Russia in Syria at a time when they are actively violating the one that we already have. They're also talking about possibly whether or not to bring up with Vladimir Putin the idea of asking for help evacuating some of those that the U.S. previously supported, like the White Helmets, these rescue workers who have been helping out Syrians in distress.
The concern is that Vladimir Putin will run circles around President Trump. Not only was he a KGB agent, he's had 20 years experience as president of Russia. President Trump said that he's going to approach this by winging it, this sort of we'll see mentality. A lot of concern about this private meeting, especially because of that. Let's bring Ian Bremmer in, who's joining us now. On this issue alone, about Vladimir Putin running circles around President Trump, how concerning is that?
I think it's concerning to Trump's own administration, to his advisors. We certainly saw in the NATO meetings that Trump was running all of these bilaterals himself. He wasn't going to his advisors the way he did even a little bit more at the G7 with Larry Kudlow, frequently taking a big piece of it. He clearly isn't prepped for this meeting. Putin really is. The first 90 minutes, it's just the two of them. He's going to bring up Russian interference in U.S. elections. What's he going to say? How Trump's going to respond to that? We know what Trump's thinking about. Hey, to the extent this guy was involved, he was supporting me. He was going after the DNC. He was going after Hillary. Will he mention that? That's clearly one of the reasons he has to have the meeting privately, is he just can't have the legal exposure of having anybody else in. That's a really unprecedented situation for any American president to be in.
Well, it looks like you're seeing those.
Here we have the two presidents sitting down, and we'll now go to them.
Уважаемый господин президент, мне очень приятно встретиться с вами здесь, на гостеприимной земле Финляндии, в Хельсинки. У нас продолжаются постоянные контакты. В предыдущие месяцы мы по телефону говорили, встречались несколько раз на площадках различных международных мероприятий. Ну, конечно, настало время поговорить обстоятельно о наших двусторонних отношениях и по различным болевым точкам в мире и достаточно много для того, чтобы мы обратили на это внимание.
And now it's time to talk in detail about our bilaterals as well as some of the hot points worldwide. There's one number of these for us to make note of and discuss them.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, Mr. President, I'd like to congratulate you on a really great World Cup, one of the best ever, from what everybody tells me, one of the best ever, and also for your team itself doing so well. I watched quite a bit in the United States. We call it soccer, and I watched quite a bit of it, and I watched the entire final and the semifinals, and they were really spectacular games, but it was beautifully done. So congratulations on that.
Я смотрел за играми, у нас в Соединенных Штатах эта игра называется «Футбол сокер». Смотрел на финальную игру, так и полуфинальную игру. Очень интересно.
Most importantly, we have a lot of good things to talk about and things to talk about. We have discussions on everything from trade to military to missiles to nuclear to China. We'll be talking a little bit about China. Our mutual friend, President Xi.
У нас есть огромное количество тем, которые нам надо будет обсудить, очень интересные темы, начиная с таких вопросов, как торговля, коммерция, военные вопросы, также вопросы, связанные с Китаем, с ядерной политикой, поговорим также о нашем друге Xi.
I think we have great opportunities together as two countries that, frankly, we have not been getting along very well for the last number of years. I've been here not too long, but it's getting close to 2 years, but I think we will end up having an extraordinary relationship. I hope so. I've been saying, and I'm sure you've heard over the years, and as I campaigned, that getting along with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing.
У наших двух стран есть огромная возможность для того, чтобы наладить наши взаимоотношения. На протяжении нескольких лет эти отношения не были плохие, где-то около 2 лет. Но я думаю, что есть возможность, чтобы эти отношения между нашими странами стали чрезвычайно нехорошими. Я во время своей предвыборной кампании говорил о том, что ладить с Россией дело очень хорошо.
And I really think the world wants to see us get along. We are the two great nuclear powers. We have 90% of the nuclear, and that's not a good thing, it's a bad thing. And I think we hopefully can do something about that, because it's not a positive force, it's a negative force. So we'll be talking about that among other things.
Мы будем говорить о наших ядерных потенциалах. Мы две страны, которые содержат более 90% всех ядерных арсеналов, и это не является чем-то хорошим. Это не очень хорошая вещь, поэтому нам надо делать все для того, чтобы улучшить наше положение по этому вопросу. Я думаю, мы будем говорить непосредственно о вопросах, связанных с ядерной политикой.
And with that, the world awaits, and I look forward to our personal discussion, which I think begins now, and then we're going to meet our whole team. You have quite a few representatives on I do, and we all have a lot of questions, and hopefully we'll come up with answers, most importantly. It's great to be with you.
Свою команду, большое количество людей, и я думаю, что мы сможем обсудить большое количество очень важных для нас вопросов.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
And there you see that handshake and warm words between President Trump and President Putin, as President Trump congratulating Putin on a very successful World Cup that he says everybody watched and was spectacular. Elizabeth Palmer is here with me and has covered President Putin for decades since he has been in power. What did you make of his comments? What did you make of the body language?
Well, he was looking very relaxed, but not eager. President Trump was leaning forward with some intensity. Putin almost looked bored is way too strong, but slightly detached.
Is that intentional?
Probably. We have to remember he's an ex-spy. He's been trained in mind games. And he was also very non-committal about what they would talk about, whereas President Trump actually put some suggestions on the table. So Putin's playing his cards very close to his chest.
When President Trump says the world wants to see us get along, that getting along with Russia is a good thing, how does that square with what the rest of the U.S. administration is saying are Russia's current efforts to undermine American democracy through cyber attacks and other means?
Well, getting along with Russia clearly is a good thing. The question is, at what cost, and if it means putting up with Russia's continuing attacks on American institutions and trying to enlarge its sphere of influence in Europe and undercutting NATO, then probably most of the American institutions would say, no, the cost is just too high. And it's unlikely that Putin is going to leave this conference having given anything up, let's just say right now.
All right. Well, now this historic summit between the two of them that some in the administration are trying to downplay as just a meeting, but an extraordinary hour-and-a-half, scheduled hour-and-a-half private meeting that President Trump called a personal meeting between the two of them, and then a press conference. Major Garrett has been covering President Trump as he travels through Europe. What else strikes you about what President Trump mentioned just this morning?
Well, talking about the hope for an extraordinary relationship with Russia sets a pretty high bar. One thing I think it's worth remembering as President Trump goes into this summit, he's got a couple of things on his mind in relationship to Vladimir Putin. He will come in and say our economy is very strong. President Trump's administration has authorized the export of liquefied natural gas to Europe. It hasn't happened yet, but it's in process. That's a counterweight to Russian influence over energy supplies throughout Europe. Remember, the Trump administration also approved the movement of lethal weapons to Ukraine. That hasn't changed the military dynamic there in any way, but it's a step that the Obama administration didn't take. So the president would argue here in Helsinki he has done things to send a signal to Vladimir Putin that he is going to be tougher economically in terms of exports and in terms of military equipment to places like Ukraine than his predecessor was. And that's something that President Trump will bring into this meeting and convey to Putin one way or the other.
All right, Major Garrett also here in Helsinki. Thank you. And we will have full coverage of the Helsinki summit on CBS this morning, and we'll bring you the news conference with President Trump and President Putin when it happens later this morning. Coverage will continue throughout the day on your local news on this CBS station and on our 24-hour streaming network, CBSN. Watch it at cbsnews.com. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell with John Dickerson, Gail King, and Bianna Golodryga and Margaret Brennan. CBS News, Helsinki.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.